Well, folks, welcome to the Noble Man Podcast. I am thankful that you have joined us, and even more thankful that you get a chance to hear today from our guest, Jeff Clark. Jeff is a rural church strategist with the International Mission Board. I had the privilege of meeting him several weeks ago while I was speaking at a family fusion mission camp. He was there with, 3 generations, I guess.
Yes.
And so it was good to meet him. We got into a conversation, but let Jeff introduce himself and tell a little bit about who he is and what he does so that we can get into a really fun conversation here.
Well, like I said, my name's Jeff Clark. You'll tell almost immediately with the ever so slight accent that I have, that I was born and raised in Tennessee, in Appalachia. I'm pure Appalachian. Whatever your picture is of Appalachia is true of somebody in my family. One of us has done it, is it, or in jail for it right now. It's just a part of who we are. My job right now is to help rural churches, and mainly to help rural churches become more missional in their work and in their impact. Our president, Paul Chitwood, said the biggest problem, and you can use any place you want, the biggest problem in Washington, D.C. is not politicians, it's not Democrats or Republicans, it's lostness.
Right.
And the one answer to that lostness is Jesus. And so the biggest problem we have in rural America is not lack of finances, not need for more leaders. The biggest problem is lostness, and the answer is Jesus. And so trying to get people back focused on getting Jesus to the lost people in rural communities in the United States and literally around the world. That's my like I told you, that's my one trick. I'm a one trick pony. The only thing I do is rural. I grew up in a little country church. 65 was a big Easter Sunday, revival Sunday. I've helped rural churches for the last 40 years. This is all I know. This is all I do.
Well, I love it. And so Jeff and I, some of the folks at this camp, this missions camp that we were working at, went out for some ice cream on a night afterwards and after some work. And so he and I sat down, and I had not met him before, but man, I fell in love with this trick that he has. And so I just delight in his explanation that he's a one-trick pony, because I say the same thing. And I tell folks that my trick is helping churches disciple men. I want to see churches disciple men to walk with Jesus and lead well. And so Jeff's trick is helping rural churches. And there is a very important overlap there, because if we want to see men step up and lead in the church, then we have to see them discipled well. And I believe that part of what will ultimately happen is that men who are discipled well, who begin to respond to Jesus' call on their life, whatever form that takes, some of those men will ultimately be called to pastor churches, and they may be called to pastor small churches. And so that's we just can't produce enough pastors through the seminary. And so Jeff and I had this fantastic conversation. But before I get to more of that, Jeff, part of what caught my attention was the number of different places where you had pastored or planted churches in your pastoral career. So recap that for us, because you were all over the place pastoring.
Yes. I first started out, we thought we're going to go immediately overseas. But back in the 1980s, you had to do 2 years in the United States before you could go overseas. So we said, well, we don't want to do our 2 years in the South. So we went to northern Michigan, to a small, if you know Michigan, shaped like your hand, Detroit's down here. We went 5 hours north of Detroit. I didn't know there was 5 hours north of Detroit. And started a church in a little community that had one traffic light, and that's the only traffic light in the county. Completely Polish German community, is like foreign missions for a hillbilly from Tennessee. We started a church there. We went to Florida, started a church in the suburbs of Orlando. I knew then that I'm not made for suburban work. Went back and did another church start in Middle Tennessee. Then church starting became very popular. And when it
Right.
became popular, I was recruited to be the church starter strategist for West Virginia. And you know how many big metropolis that West Virginia has. So that meant
That's
mostly
right.
starting churches in rural communities and places where there were already multiple churches, but you could go into a community and 15% of the community is in church on a given Sunday, even though there was 5 churches in that small town. So how do we start another church? How do we help revitalize? That was before revitalization was a phrase or popular. That work went well. I was then asked to go to Montana to be the executive director for Southern Baptist. And again, Montana, 1 million people scattered over area 3 times the size of Virginia. And
Wow.
so if you took all the people who lived in Richmond and scattered them over Virginia, West Virginia, Maryland, and half of North Carolina, that'd give you the idea of how the most remote county in Virginia has 17 people per square mile. 17. In
Right.
Montana, it's 0.5 per square mile.
For the entire state.
Yeah, it's just very remote. And then,
Sure.
Then through some amazing events, we had an opportunity to move overseas. That's a whole nother God story in itself. We moved to China and Taiwan. My work there was mostly with rural churches and rural people groups, working to find and assign people groups. And they asked me in 2019 to come back here and help focus on rural churches. There's a big need to help rural churches become more missional. Sometimes
Right.
there's a downward spiral where people, you have less people, so you cut your budget, take out youth program or whatever, and now you have less money, now you have less people, and it spirals down. And how do you step out of that spiral into a more missional mindset? And that's what I came here for.
Wow. So so Michigan, Florida, West Virginia, Middle Tennessee, Montana, China, Taiwan. I mean, you've been all over the place.
Yeah, I can't keep
as
a
God
job.
called you. Well, you can't keep a job.
Right.
Well, so let me ask you this. You used the term rural church a number of times. So how do you define a rural church? What is the definition of a rural church?
Wow.
And how would you explain that?
That took me probably 6 months or more to figure that out. And that's one of the very first things we did is you need to define what you're going to do. And so I'll give a question back to you. The U.S. government has 24 different definitions of rural. Okay, 24.
Wow.
Every organization. The Census Bureau puts it at a number. What do you think the number is that would be that you consider urban and rural?
You mean, is that a population density or?
No, just a pure population number.
So I don't know, let's say 3,000 in a town or something like that. I'm just pulling a number out of the air. Right. I have no idea.
It's 5,000. So if you're 5,001, you're the same as New York City.
Wow.
Okay. And we know towns of 5,000 throughout Virginia that are not urban.
Right.
Okay. So what I did was look at how to make a continuum. And I'm sorry, I have to use my hands. I can't. If you tied my hands up, I'd stutter, I guess. I don't know. We start with remote areas where there's not even a village.
Right.
Then you have villages. That's up to 1,000, 1,500 people. It's where you know everybody. Then you have small towns, and small towns can be up to 10, 12,000 people. And now you have multiple churches. And if you've ever heard of the game 6 Degrees of Kevin Bacon, where everybody's 6 steps away from Kevin, well, in a small town, you're 1 degree of Kevin Bacon. You don't know everybody, but you know somebody who knows somebody. And so, and then you have regional towns, and these can be still very rural, but because of where they're located on the interstate, they have multiple hotels. That means, or they have a hospital, or the federal court system is there. So people come into that town, or you have a Walmart. Maybe you have a Walmart, and people come from 3 different counties to that Walmart. But that town still feels very rural. And then you have transitional towns. They once were rural, but the city has come out and has taken them over. So you still have old timers and newcomers. So in a broad spectrum, that might be up to maybe 50,000 people. That may be too large a number, but when you still say we're not like Richmond, we're not like that. You may have 12,000, 15,000 people, and you go, yeah, we got 15,000 people, but we're not urban.
Right.
Yeah, so sometimes it's a mindset, sometimes it's a number. I don't get stuck on the numbers. I get more focused on the mindset. And especially you go to a town that is maybe a little bit bigger, like Winchester, Virginia. The First Baptist there may feel more urban, but the other community churches in that community may feel more rural.
Right.
So how's that for avoiding an answer?
Well, you used a term that I was thinking, and then it came out of your mouth, and that is a mindset. There is a mindset, it seems, that kind of drives how we feel about church and the community that we live in, the closeness of it, and so forth. And so I think that's significant. So tell me about the plight of churches in these areas. Why is it that churches are struggling in rural areas, and what do you see trend-wise going on there that someone who's interested in men's discipleship would find valuable or intriguing?
Okay, we should finish about noon, just on that one quick. The biggest issue, I just met recently with most of the main rural leaders across the United States from multiple denominations. And the one thing every one of them said over and over and over again is we lack, we're in a desperate need for pastors.
Right.
These small rural churches. And again, if you graduated from seminary, now you got a college degree, a seminary degree, and you're ready to go off to, Circle, Montana, a town of 350 people, and you're only 3 hours from the nearest Walmart. You look at that and you go, man, there's no way that I can make a name for myself here. There's no way to establish myself. That has been very difficult. Also on that is we have since about 1945, we've made rural churches pass-through churches. You come out of seminary, you serve for 3 or 4 years, get you some experience, and move up to a bigger church. And we've got to break that cycle. And the way we do that is quit using seminary graduates for these small rural churches. So, and I tell them, and this comes back to where we overlap. What I've told them, these leaders working in small rural areas, we are now paying for the lack of discipleship over the last 30, 40 years. We went to, and I grew up in the 60s and 70s, where the push was conversion.
Yes.
We can get them converted, so you learn CWT and EE and 4 spiritual laws and EIO, whatever the newest program was. And we got to get them saved. And the thing that keeps messing me up with my whole life is I go back and then read the Bible. And,
that will mess you up in the best way.
It seems like it says we're supposed to make disciples. Right. That conversion is just getting them into the race. That's not finishing the race. And so we're paying now for the last 30, 40 years of not making disciples. or not having a focus on disciple making. Used to, when in the 70s, when I was in youth groups, we couldn't find enough places for the young men to go. The country churches were going, we've got a pastor. We don't. We've got 10 more people waiting in line to be pastor.
Right
now, there's literally thousands of Southern Baptist churches without pastors, with little hope of ever finding one.
Right.
And so we've had to look at how do we restructure those churches so that they can go without a traditional pastor, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. And one of the things that I know is happening, I'm very familiar with a couple of rural churches that have called females as pastors. And so this is a challenge for us in, when I speak of complementarian theology, you guys have heard me talk about that on this podcast before. We believe that God has ordained that men should serve as spiritual leaders in their homes and in the churches. And we can go into a lot of detail about that. But I believe that it is out of order, according to God's plan, for us to call a female pastor for the local church, especially in the lead pastor role. And, you guys can email me, write me, whatever we want to talk about there. But I just agree so much with Jeff that what's missing here is men who are responding to a call to go and serve. And so he talked about two things. He talked about a young pastor coming out of seminary can't go to a small rural church and make a name for himself. He can't. So many of these guys don't see a future there in a small community. And the guys who do go there as pastors out of seminary are just using that to get some training so that they can move on to the next step. But I'm also hearing stories from time to time of men who are mid-career. Maybe they've been businessmen, maybe they've done something, they're semi-retired, but they are godly men. They are elder qualified men. They're 1 Timothy 3, Titus 1, elder qualified guys who have been built up and raised up and discipled through the local church. And God is calling some of those folks to pastor small churches of 30, 40, 50 people. And guys, part of what I am hopeful that you will feel in this conversation is God may be calling you, listener to this podcast, to consider, could I go and pastor a small church? Is that part of what God would have for me in my development? And Jeff, I can tell, is chomping at the bit. So jump in here, Jeff, and speak to this, because I know I'm playing music you can dance to.
No, absolutely. Well, the thing is, you have to go with what you're called to do. And I thank God for those who are seminary graduates who are called to spend their whole life doing rural work. There's godly men all over who have said, I'm not going up the Baptist career ladder. I am focusing on this. But also, we need lay people to rise up. A classic example, my mom and dad's church, about 10 years ago, got down to 6 people. And so the director of missions is going, well, how are we going to close this church, and what are we going to do? It's out here in the country. There's little hope of restarting something. What are we going to do at this building? And one of the ladies said, well, my grandson teaches a Sunday school class at a First Baptist in town. Maybe he would come out and pastor. And he thought about that and says, oh, pastoring 6 people, that's smaller than my Sunday school class. I can probably do that, So he came out, and one of the things we told him was, he said, I don't know, I can't preach. I said, well, preaching is only half as long as a Sunday school class, and nobody gets to interrupt. So, and so this is a way easier than teaching a Sunday school class. And so he came out and started pastoring those 6 people, and we helped mentor him, had people help mentor him. And currently the church is running about 95 people.
Wow.
What
a cool God story.
Yeah. All they needed was somebody to love them. And then the church just literally took off, and he's been developed as a great pastor. and one of the things we're trying to help with some of these small churches is help them deconstruct the idea of a pastor, where the pastor has so many roles in a traditional church. So we break those roles down and give them to different people in the church. So one guy does the Bible study, and we just tell him that. We're not asking you to preach. If there's 10 of you, sit in a circle. Teach the class like you'd teach a Sunday school class. One person can lead in a couple of songs. Now with YouTube, you can sing along with somebody. One person does member care. One person does the finances. And you break this role into multiple pieces. And I helped a little church in Montana do this that had no hope. They were in a town of 175 people, one of the most remote areas in the United States. And they said, we can't even get a resume. I said, well, let's just break the job down. And they started doing this. I said, if we do this, we don't even need a pastor in their head of what the traditional picture of what a pastor is. I said, no, you don't. You can do this together as a family. With 15 people, you don't need a whole lot of committees. And so helping some rural churches rethink how to structure themselves has been an important part. Helping young men, middle-aged men, sometimes some senior adults who say, I can teach the class, I can do that proclamation part.
Right.
Needing, so I know some of you are sitting out there going, I could never pastor. Well, can you do one piece? Can you do one part? Yeah. It's the how do you eat an elephant one bite at a time type thing. So we're looking for people who can do just take one step. And we have so many rural churches that are in such great need. So we just need somebody who can do that one step. I can't quite figure out why we have churches that have 4 pianists, and then we have 4 churches out through the countryside that have no pianists. The same thing with gifted Bible teachers. Why does one church? I'm third string. You're going, I'm third string Bible study teacher in my church. Well, you'd be first string at a country church. So we're asking you to look at having the courage to step out of what is traditional and what you've known and what is, hear this, what is comfortable. Our God today is comfort. And people say, well, I'm just not comfortable doing that. Well, great. That's how you know it's a good first step with God. God throughout Scripture is not interested in anybody's comfort, only their obedience.
There you go. Well, and so I was getting ready to use the comfort piece in this because I think that's what happens sometimes. Oh no, you're right on track. I think that's part of what happens. We're comfortable with the people that we worship with. We're comfortable with the format and the focus and the quality of the worship and even the quality of the preaching. And so you said something to me while over cheese fries and ice cream that has resonated with me. And I want to set you up for this because you mentioned that with YouTube we could sing along with someone and worship. And one of the things that I would imagine that young pastors or anyone who would be considering something like this would say is, I can't preach well enough. I look and there's so many people that, the standard line for seminary guys that are being taught to preach is you need to spend 15 to 20 hours a week preparing your message, sometimes more. And the typical guy who's going to be serving a small church is probably a bivocational guy. He's got a lot of irons in the fire. He may not have 15 to 20 hours to prepare a message. So how does he compete in this world where we could be listening to world-class preachers on YouTube or podcasts? How does the rural church guy who's stepping into that situation, how does he compete with the gifted communicator who has so much time to prepare?
Well, different sized churches have different gifts, different things that they can do well. I say it like this. The British have a phrase, horses have courses. That's why you don't ever see a Shetland pony in the Kentucky Derby. No matter how well you train that horse, he just can't, that little pony cannot compete with thoroughbreds.
Right.
And you don't see thoroughbreds at children's parties. They're just too high strung for that. Horses have courses. And these churches have courses. And what you need to understand when you start talking about rural churches, things are upside down to larger churches. Let me give you an example. Right. In a larger church, the key is performance, and that's what you're talking about. We need a preacher who can perform. But when you get to a rural church, it's people over performance. That's every month. Aunt Sadie sings a special. She's terrible. She sounds like two cats fighting. It's just a sad thing. But every month she comes back and does it again. And a new pastor coming in going, why are we letting Aunt Sadie sing? Because it would break her heart to tell her no. And we love her more than her performance.
Yeah.
And so you don't have to be a great preacher in a rural church. They'll forgive bad preaching, but they will not forgive bad pastoring, bad shepherding. So if you love your people, that's way more important than being able to preach like whoever your model preacher is today. If you can preach a halfway decent sermon and love your people. Again, the pastor I was talking about at my parents' church, I think his first sermon was 7 minutes, if I remember right. And we're going, well, Charles Stanley, he's not.
Yeah.
But he has grown into that position. But somehow, with his 7-minute sermons, he was able to grow a church to 90. And of course, now his sermons are full orbed, and he's learned how to do that. He's grown it's a skill development, but it's more about people in rural churches than it is about performance. So don't, and one of the things that Satan does all the time is wants us to compare ourselves to others. Compare ourselves to the big churches on TV or the big church in the nearest town or whatever. And in a rural church, again, your job is to shepherd, not CEO.
Yep.
So I got a lot more to say, but I'm going to stop there.
Well, I got to tell you, you said exactly what I was hoping you would, because I have held on to the people will forgive bad preaching, but they won't forgive bad shepherding is what I have. And I've talked to my wife about that multiple times since we had our conversation. And so guys, I just encourage you. I'm hopeful, prayerful that someone listening to this is going to say, man, there may be something that God wants me to do in this season of my life to invest in a small congregation. I just had a conversation about 3 or 4 weeks ago with a guy who pastors a small church, and it's like it's less than an hour away from his house, but he's pastoring this church and he's loving on those folks. He's ministering to that community. He's a bivocational guy. He's got a full-time job, but he is loving on this small congregation and they are loving him back, and he's having kingdom impact. And so there may be someone listening to this that would be called to that. And if you're a pastor listening to this, then could I just encourage you to lean into this whole idea of developing men for ministry and making sure that you're discipling some guys who could catch a vision or hear a call from the Lord to go and support or serve a church that's in need, because they're out there all over the place. I'm gonna tee another one up for you here, Jeff. Our theme verse for this year, for this kind of academic year for Noble Warriors, is Acts 4:13. Now, when they saw the boldness of Peter and John and perceived that they were uneducated common men, they were astonished, and they recognized that they had been with Jesus. And so, guys, I would just say you can't take Jesus out of this equation, and you can't do it in your own strength. We must be submitted to and obedient to the Lord Jesus Christ, and then allow him to use us and give us that boldness. And I think we got guys sitting on the sidelines who have everything that they need except a vision or some encouragement to step into this ministry opportunity that's all around out there. So, Jeff, what would you say about Acts 4:13 and how we can apply that in our churches and the rural churches today?
The number one thing we need for pastors, for anybody working in a rural church, is we need a calling over education. We can. I think about Outback restaurants. When they first started the Outback restaurants, they said, we got a couple of different things. We're going to only open at noon through the evening. That way, in the mornings, the two owners said we can go surfing. And so they only have to have one shift. And one of the things they tried to find the best waiters and waitresses they could find. And then they learned that this was just too difficult. Then they said, we're going to find the friendliest, most outgoing people we can find. We can teach them how to be good waiters and waitresses. That's why when you go to Outback, they'll sit down beside you, kneel down. They just talk to you. Well, the same thing. In rural churches, what we're looking for is somebody with a calling. We can help help with skill development. But you can't make somebody nice. You can't teach somebody how to be nice, and you can't put a calling in somebody that doesn't have it. What you do have are people who are listening to this podcast today who are going, there has to be more to church than what I'm doing. My church, I've got a great preacher. Our church has a great youth group. I'm in a great Sunday school class, but there's something more that I can do. You're looking for a challenge, and that's what this is. This is a next step. You know, God's calling you to do more, but you don't know what it is. Maybe this is part of that answer. And what I will offer is, if anybody out here is listening to this and going, I want to do more, what's the next steps we can take? Contact us, Mike or me, and we'll work together and help you take the next steps of faith. And the next step, we understand, I mix so many different metaphors. My hillbilly natures tell stories. So it's like running. If I don't know if you can see me, but I'm a very well-rounded person. And so if I got up in the morning and I wanted to start running, God put on me a passion for running, I wouldn't be able to start with a marathon or a half marathon or a quarter marathon. Mailbox and back might be my first day. And so we want to help you with the first step that is actually doable for you. You're going, I couldn't ever pastor. That's great. Let's see how to plug you in with what you can do that can help a church. I'm reading the book right now, and the guy said he was so excited. He had a unicorn come to his church. He's a rural pastor. He has a father, a mother, and two children. A unicorn family. This is the trifecta of what a rural pastor is looking for. A godly man, godly wife, and two children. Because we're always wanting people who can help our church. But the truth is, when we start doing ministry, we're going to have to start looking at people we can help, not people who can help us. And then we're going to have to disciple them into workers. But what we need right now are some discipled workers who can go out and maybe you're not going to pastor, but maybe you could be a Sunday school teacher or a leader in a rural church to help strengthen rural churches. So it's not just, I know we've been talking about the pastoral role, but there's also church strengthening type roles.
Yeah.
Where say, I'm going to go out to this little country church, and people are saying, but what about my children? Well, I'm going to tell you, one of the best things you can do to disciple your children is work in a rural church. My wife started teaching vacation Bible school at age 12. so she graduated sixth grade, so they put her immediately back in with third grade teaching. So how did she learn how to be a Sunday school teacher? At 12 years old. At 14, this little country church asked her if she would come and play the piano. She only knew one hymn with her right hand only. So they sang that one hymn, and the preacher preached. The next week, she worked on another hymn. So the next week, they sang the first hymn again and the second hymn. And she kept building up and started adding her left hand until finally she had a repertoire of songs. So that by the time she was 18 years old, she's an accomplished church pianist. How do you become accomplished church pianist? It might not be in a large youth group at a large church. It might be out here in these little country churches. This is how you teach your children how to live out their faith. So it's not what can the church offer your kids. It's what can your kids offer the church.
Wow.
So
lots of on-the-job training there, it sounds like. So
yes,
and skill development. Well, so I think about what you're saying with go and be a supporter, be part of, whether it's Sunday school teaching or maybe it's leading worship. I mean, it could be any sort of thing, a way that you could plug into strengthening and encouraging a local church. And Jeff, one of the things that caught my attention last year, Barna put out a survey about discipleship. It was on discipleship, and one of the findings was some seasoned folks, baby boomers, busters, the category that I fall into. There were lots of people who still did not feel qualified to lead in any way. They felt like they hadn't learned enough about what it meant to walk out the Christian life, and they were still sitting in a classroom, still anxious for a Sunday school teacher to come and teach them. And part of what I took from that is, man, there are folks that have been sitting in a classroom, they've been learning, they've been sitting under good preaching for decades that are better equipped. Some of you are better equipped to go and serve in another church context than you believe you are. And so it may be time to prayerfully ask the Lord, should I go somewhere? And we're not talking, I mean, Jeff works internationally. This is an international problem. I'm not calling you or suggesting that you have to go overseas. Man, you could go 20 minutes and serve a church, be encouraging in a local church that is in need of some help from somebody who's willing to raise their hand and say, yes, I can come and be part of seeing this church strengthened so that the kingdom of God can be advanced in this area. And so speak to that, calling out the gifts of the saints who still believe they haven't learned enough, they haven't grown enough to be valuable to the kingdom.
Right. Bill Fay did Share Jesus Without Fear. And the number one reason why people don't witness is they're afraid. What are they afraid of? Two things: rejection, and the second one is that they don't know enough. He said, what we have are spiritually constipated Christians. That they've gathered everything up, but they've not. My wife says, if you can teach a good first grade class, you can pastor. You know enough. And also, I'll give you 3 words that will set your ministry free. If you learn how to say these 3 words, and pastors, if you're listening to this will set you free. This is the greatest thing you can ever learn. Ready? I don't know. Okay?
Yep.
If you learn how to say those words, if you can say it with confidence, I don't know. Okay? Somebody asks you, well, can you explain the theological ramifications of the eminent Teresa? I don't know. Let me check with somebody. If you'll spell that out for me, I'll try to look that up, but you don't have to know everything. Again, it's not about performance. But they go, well, our preacher might not be the sharpest crayon in the box, but he sure loves us.
Yeah.
We're going back to that people thing. And you get one of these theological questions, and sometimes they're profound theological, sometimes they're real simple. I had a lady one time say, she was trying to do a program right after you become a Christian. She couldn't figure out 1 John 1:9. And she kept reading John 1:9. Right. I said, well, there's some more Johns in the back of them. And she goes, well, why didn't they put all them together? I don't know. I have no idea. Great question. Instead of trying to give her an answer, just, I don't know. And there's not an answer to that one that I can find that's satisfactory. But what you're trying to do is say, I want to help you. I want to minister to you. And if you've got a profound theological question, I will try to find an answer for it if there is one for it. But the main thing is to eliminate the fear of not knowing enough. If you know Jesus and you've got a Bible and you've got a computer, you can look up just about anything in today's world and find answers to just about any question. And there's all sorts of resources. The Southern Baptist SBCV has all sorts of resources. You can contact me. Mike will know the answer to any question you have.
Don't you throw me under that bus, friend. Oh, gosh.
But the thing is, don't let that stop you from doing what God's called you to do. Fear is, in Scripture, fear is not a sufficient excuse for not doing God's will. Jonah, God says go. Jonah says no. You see how that worked out for him, right?
Yeah.
Being afraid, God wasn't concerned about his fear. He was concerned about his obedience. Yeah. Not about his comfort, but about his obedience. It's all about obedience. What is it God's wanting you to do?
That's right.
Being a good church member is not sufficient. Nowhere in the Scripture are we called to be good church members. We're called to be good witnesses, disciple makers.
And folks, I would say one of the things that if you've done any parenting work, one of the things that Dobson and some other folks have said along the way is delayed obedience is disobedience. And so when you put off a right response to some calling or some assignment, then it really is disobedience. And so one of the things I saw my dad do a couple of times was he'd hear the preacher on Sunday morning, and then he'd go take some action on Sunday afternoon with something that he felt like he was supposed to do. And so I saw that modeled for me a couple of times, and there have been several times in my life where I can't wait. I've got to go do something right now. And so the Lord may be speaking to you. Go talk to your pastor. Go talk to someone. Reach out to Jeff. Reach out to me. We'll try to put you in touch with someone who can help you figure out what's the next piece.
I am without one plea. We're calling for you right now.
Yeah, there you go. So, you know what? This has been so much fun. And this is, I do think that Jeff and I are kind of funny talking about being one-trick ponies. His trick is helping the rural church around the world. And my trick is to see the church disciple men well, to walk with Jesus and lead. And so I do think there's a significant overlap here because there are churches. I mean, I don't know what you may know the statistics about how many. I mean, you were in the Southern Baptist Convention, so I don't know how many Southern Baptist churches are without pastors right now. But many of them would fall into this rural church, small town context that just really could use someone who is willing, or a couple of couples that would be willing to go in and make a difference in a local church community. Yeah. So
and again, this is one of those deals where we're talking about you can go 20 miles and make a difference. Some of you may want to go again to Montana or Minnesota or Michigan and say, I really want to go somewhere where I'm desperately needed as a business missionary. I can do my work from anywhere. So if you're listening and you can do your work by computer or from anywhere in the country, then please talk to me. I would love to help you go to some of the most remote areas, some of the most rural areas, some of the most needy areas in the United States that need pastors and support people. So it might be you go 20 miles, it might be you go 200 miles, it might be you go 1,200 miles, but I'm going to help you with any stage along that scale.
That's awesome. Well, Jeff, we're getting at time here, and I need to shut this down. But can you recommend a resource or a website or anything? And then we'll want to make sure we include your contact information in our show notes so folks can know how to get in touch with you. But if someone's intrigued by the conversation that we're having, is there a resource or a website or something that would give them some additional insights on this sort of thinking?
Wheaton College Rural Matters Institute would be a good website. There's a lot of places. I run that website. I've got a list of schools that offer educational opportunities for that. Your SBCV people would be a great contact for how to get involved locally. But again, that Rural Church Institute, there's multiple schools that offer free trainings and education classes, courses, certificate programs to help you be prepared to help do rural work.
Awesome.
And then there's a list of books on that website. Dozens and dozens of books on rural work and small church work that would be helpful. And again, if you contact me, I'll be glad to help in any way that I can and get you referred to the right place. If I can't answer your question, I'll help you find the right person, right place to help you plug in.
Yeah, because if Jeff can't answer your question, he's going to give you 3 words. I don't know. But he's going to go find he's going to go find an answer for you.
Yeah.
So, well, folks, so we'll put a link to some of those things in the show notes. If you're interested in following up, we'll make sure that we give you contact information for Jeff. He's with the International Mission Board, and so we've primarily talked about this issue in the United States, and obviously it's a global issue. I was just talking to a coworker who was in Kazakhstan and for a mission trip, and so they're hurting for pastors in villages there, and I know that's the same in some other places. And so, folks, if nothing else, be praying that God would give you wisdom and let you hear clearly what His will and His desire is for you, and then that you would walk into that with obedience, and that you would say yes to whatever He calls you to. So, Jeff, any final words as we close down here?
Go.
Amen. Amen. Go. Do the work.
Literally, that's our task. And all authority has been given under heaven and earth. Mm-hmm. Therefore, because of that authority, we go. So you don't have to go on your own authority, on your own skills, your own abilities. You're going under the authority of Jesus.
There you go.
You don't have to create anything. You just represent.
I love it. Well, Jeff, thank you so much for your time today. Folks, Jeff Clark is our guest today. He's with the Rural Church Strategist with the International Mission Board, helping rural churches make connections to missional work. And just so thankful for that. And so, Jeff, glad you're with us. Folks, tune in next time. We'll be back with another podcast episode next week, but we are happy to encourage you to walk in obedience to the Lord's call on your life. Thanks so much, and God bless you, folks.